Actually, I should prefer to see the Aborigines.
And the Indians, too.
Good. This should be most enlightening.
What makes the red man red?
Teach 'em all about Red Man.
What made the red man red? What made the red man red? What made the red man red? What made the red man red?
Teach 'em all about Red Man. Red Man.
All right, so we got some amazing guests here today. I'm going to take a photo of what we all look like because we look absurd. We're sitting outside
Because
with
we
our
can't be
masks-
inside together.
with our masks on. Can smell people cooking hot dogs. You can hear the birds, the helicopters, the
The
dogs
wind.
will start barking.
Like you're gonna hear everything during
Yeah,
Red
this is
Power
like
Hour today.
Pocahontas.
It's real
when it closes the
indigenous.
wind out here.
Oh my God.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it's a beautiful day to be indigenous.
Got my Pendleton mask on. My Nike Insight on.
I mean, but like legit, we have like leather on the table.
Yeah,
There's
we
some
do.
seeds
I
out. We got corn growing 10 feet from
Got our res connected
jacked
jacked up audio system going on. Got the generator on.
We have
spliced.
Brandon who's
Yeah, it's all spliced
in
together.
Window Rock and the Navajo Nation calling in.
Got
Yeah.
twisty ties holding together.
Been using some duct tape.
Yeah, has twisty ties for our prayer ties.
Twisty ties for our prayer.
Cool. Well, so we got some guests on the show today. So let's start with Cleo. If you want to introduce yourself.
I'm Cleo Otero. I am from the Navajo and Hopi Nations. I come from the Tangle people, born for the Red House people, and on my maternal grandfathers are Hopi Bear people, and on my maternal side they're Metal people, and that's what makes me the Nahopi warrior. She goes. Yeah, that's who I am. I come from a place called Nutnilgene, or Toriorn, and then the primary area that I'm from is from a little spot called Wolfstan, and they call it Maitsotas. That's where I'm from, and that's where my mom and dad still reside, and they're high core quarantined right now by my brother, and I'm really happy about that. Yeah, and that's who I am, and I'm happy to be here. What else did you want me to say? Like, what else do you want to?
That's
That's good. That's good. Okay.
We'll get into the rest of it later on, but
Okay.
let's introduce our other Hopi relative, the tallest Hopi
tallest
in the
Hopi
world.
in the world.
Yeah. Wow. That's some internalized colonialism.
Just as the Hopi, I am facing lateral violence all around me.
It's not lateral because we're not even eye level. Oh. So,
Okay.
Brandon, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, it's a. Hi everyone, my name is Brandon Benali. I am Dene Kenyani Dene Nishlon. Jose Tachini Dene Bashichin. Onarani Dene Dashache Adatrabaha Dene Dashanele. Kitili Ado Tsistos and Dash Gishtet Nasha. Dene Hastin Akot Ego Nishle. Brandon Benali. I am currently residing in Segahodzana, what's known as Window Rock, Arizona, the so-called capital of the Navajo reservation. And I am of the Towering House people, born for the Oraibi Hopi people. And my Hopi clan is Hanonangwa. And so that makes me and Cleo one Hopi. So there's an invisible Hopi presence. I just want to acknowledge that invisible presence among us right now. And yeah, so co-founder of Info Shop, a radical decolonial anarchist, decolonial socialist organization or collective in Window Rock. And so happy to be here and chatting with my friends. Good
Yeah,
relatives.
it's really good. It's really good to be with you all. It's actually a really beautiful day today. It doesn't feel 90 degrees, but I think it is.
It is this 90 in Albuquerque.
Yeah, but it feels real good. We're in Albuquerque. You're in Window Rock. But also we have a lot of things that are going on right now, and we decided to actually have this episode focus solely or primarily on the Navajo Nation, just to kind of debunk some of the myths and the rumors that are going on, but also to really clarify what Navajo people are experiencing, not just within kind of like the geographically defined boundaries of the Navajo Nation, but also outside of it. Because Comrade Cleo, she does a lot of work on mutual aid work here in the city with our relatives on the streets. Jasper's with us too, her partner. But also Brandon has done a lot of work on border town violence. And these are things that we want to cover in relation to thinking about COVID-19 and settler colonialism, and thinking about long-term strategies and how we combat not just a pandemic, but how do we undo these structures of oppression and domination that lead to, vulnerability among our people, but also, as we can see and we will see, high rates of death and violence against them, not just by the virus itself, but by state violence as well. So turn it over to Melanie's got a breakdown of the kind of stats of what's going on in Navajo Nation.
Yeah, so I'm really glad to be sitting here talking with folks. I miss being able to sit around the table actually and have conversations about these things, particularly with Red Nation comrades. Cleo's a member of the Albuquerque Freedom Council in the Red Nation, and Brandon's been a longtime member of the Red Nation, and we have a close relationship with the.
And Jasper is a member of the Albuquerque Freedom Council.
Jasper's the silent Navajo at the table.
Yeah. Like a good man, he's working with, he's sewing right
he's
now.
Sewing. Like a good in-law. Yeah, so the Navajo Nation has been in the news a lot, I would say, in the last week or two, because the infection rates have really skyrocketed, and right now we've been hearing a lot in the news this statistic or this soundbite that per capita the Navajo Nation is third only behind New Jersey and New York in terms of the infection and the contraction rates. I believe it's current today. This might have been data from yesterday. As we know, the data around COVID-19 infection changes like every couple of hours. But there are 2,307 positive cases in the Navajo Nation. 73 of our relatives have passed within the Navajo Nation. The average rate of infection is 45 years old, which is very young. But the average rate of death is 66 years old, which I think is consistent with elderly folks who are experiencing higher rates of mortality from the infection. Something else that I think I would like for us to talk about, especially Brandon, I know you're out organizing and doing mutual aid and distribution in the Navajo Nation, but there have been different types of curfews that the Navajo Nation government has implemented that I think are important to highlight. So on March 30th, so we're over a month into this, the Navajo Nation began to implement and enforce nightly curfews from 8 p.m. to 5 a.m. People are facing $1,000 fines if they're pulled over and found to be violating the curfew. And then over Easter weekend, did an unprecedented 57-hour curfew for the entire weekend. And this all came out of Window Rock. As folks who are listening may or may not know, the Navajo Nation covers land that is in the states of Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah. And just here in New Mexico, I wanted to focus, we're talking here in New Mexico. Of course, Brandon is over the Arizona boundary by a few miles from New Mexico. Not that the state boundaries matter, they're completely arbitrary. It's all our land anyway.
You're goddamn right.
But that the infection rates in New Mexico, I think, are also really telling about the kind of what Native people are facing and Diné people are facing here in this region. So in New Mexico, there are 3,411 confirmed cases and 123 deaths. I think this is important to think about in terms of Native issues because Native people make up 11% of the state's population, but we are now 47% of infections. That 47%, I think, was 2 days ago. 2 days prior to that, it was 44%. So we might actually be hovering somewhere around half of all of the infections in the state of New Mexico are Native people. McKinley County and Sandoval County, which are counties that are covered mostly by Eastern Navajo, by Navajo people. Navajo land are the hotspots in New Mexico. As of Friday, so as of yesterday, May 1st, McKinley County had 1,027 confirmed cases and 19 deaths. And it is the county that has the highest number of cases in the entire state. And so when we think about, the percentage of the New Mexico population that's made up by Native people, and then we think about McKinley County, which is oh my gosh, I think it's like an 80 to 90% of the population of McKinley County is Native or mostly Navajo, then we can see how those numbers are really impacting particularly Diné people. And just one more statistic that McKinley County, which again is like in the northeastern part of the state, kind of north of I-40, it's a really large county that crosses over and borders the Navajo Nation, has 30% of the state's total positive COVID-19 cases. And again, it has the most positive cases in the entire state. And so what this led to is that Gallup, New Mexico, which is a notorious reservation border town sits right next to the Navajo Nation, is about a 20-minute drive kind of southeast of where Brandon is calling from today, Window Rock. The white mayor, Gallup mayor, Jackie McKinney, who's a real asshole, with very little notice, he actually called on the governor of New Mexico, Michelle Lujan Grisham, to implement the Riot Act to enforce it's 24 hour, right? It might not be 24 hour, but a lockdown in Gallup. And Gallup is kind of like the urban hub of McKinley County. It's the border town where a lot of our relatives come off the reservation to do banking, to purchase goods at that Walmart. At one time, not too long ago, the Walmart in Gallup was the highest grossing Walmart in the country, primarily because of Navajo dollars.
And there's also been 4 cases of COVID-19 from those Walmart
workers.
Yeah.
Yep. So I don't know, is I-40, because Interstate 40, which is one of the major thoroughfares in the entire country, goes right through Gallup. I have a feeling that they're regulating that passage through I-40 as well. And so this is something brand new that I think was just implemented yesterday or this morning. So.
Yeah, they're regulating people coming on and off the on-ramps. Jasper just shared it on the phone. There's an order. But what's fascinating about it is that I also saw reports on Facebook where truckers coming through this area, stopping at gas stops, pit stops, truck stops, and everything, are not wearing PPE and refuse to. And even though the employees are, many of them are Navajo or Zuni or some other Pueblo in the area, are wearing PPE, they're being exposed to primarily non-natives coming through this area who refuse to protect themselves. I saw a Facebook post about it, about these truckers attacking some of the clerks and just harassing them about them asking them to practice proper hygiene.
Yeah, and anyone who's familiar with those truck stops that are along at the I-40 corridor, especially where it's closer to reservation boundaries, like most of those employees in those truck stops are Diné people or Native folks, Native working class folks who are being exposed to this. This reminds me of we talked a little bit about this in Red Power Hour last month, or I think we did it 2 or 3 weeks ago. But, oil and gas infrastructure workers are considered essential workers. And so they haven't stopped building pipelines through, let's say, indigenous territory, like the KXL pipeline or Coastal GasLink pipeline through Wet'suwet'en territory in so-called Canada. And so these truckers are also considered essential workers, but they're basically violating I think the protocol. They're violating the consent of indigenous nations, but they're also violating the protocol around trying to prevent the spread of the infection and coming into indigenous spaces. I mean, Gallup may consider itself the most patriotic small town of America, but that's actually indigenous land. And it's actually completely surrounded by Navajo chapters that belong to the larger Navajo Nation. Zuni Pueblo is not too far south. And so they're actually coming into indigenous land and really putting our people at risk. And when we think about the overall infection rates, which I haven't actually checked in a couple of weeks, but I'm completely dumbfounded by these numbers. But in the United States, 1.13 million people have been infected by COVID-19. It's probably much higher. That now constitutes about a third of the entire global population in terms of infection rate. And so if you think about the Navajo Nation being the third highest per capita in the nation, that has that constitutes 1/3 of all infection rates in the entire world, then you're really seeing McKinley County and the Navajo Nation is in the top 1 or 2% of communities, in terms of population density, that is really being impacted in the entire world. It's a very unique scenario. And so I've been thinking a lot about why this is the case, and maybe we can talk a bit more about this. But I just really want to like impart the magnitude of this issue for our people and the real challenges they're facing. And I think this is going to be going on for quite some time for our people. So the mutual aid work, that Brandon and Cleo are doing is really life-saving work. We're in a very dangerous scenario, I think, as Diné people. So if folks don't have anything else to add to these statistics, what I wanted to do is I just wanted to hand it over to Cleo and Brandon to describe some of the mutual aid and the solidarity work you've been doing. Just give us a description, like how are people reacting? Like, who are you helping? What are the kinds of things that you've been doing to help our relatives?
Yeah, let's start with Cleo. Maybe you can talk a little bit about the community feeds, even your background and knowing a lot of the relatives on the street and the work that you do with them.
Okay. So I started doing mutual aid when my sister was still alive. She used to go to the streets, and on Sundays I would go look for her and make sure she had clean clothing, clean hygiene, something to drink, and I also enabled her to not get hangovers like TDs. So alongside that, I would give her booze, like mixed drink, and then the rest of the day or however you can fend for yourself. But I started doing that, and then as time went along, she started asking for more. Like, can you bring more sandwiches? Can you bring like 2 or 3 more? Or like, and that just got bigger and bigger because she had homies on the streets. So Jasper and we just decided one day, like, why don't we just make a pot of stew, So it started with making a pot of stew with some fry bread and just little tiny coffee cups from the dollar store with a lid and with fry bread. We started taking that out. Sometimes it was burritos. It wasn't always the same thing, but we did it like every Sunday, but ironically our feeds now are still on Sundays with the Red Nation. Yeah. It just transferred to something bigger, and I prayed about this a long time ago that it would be on a big scale. It's amazing how it's transpired. It's crazy. But so that's kind of where we started, and that started like 10 years ago. My sister's been long gone for about 4 years now. And for a while we took a break, and then we found TRN. We were still doing sporadic, lunch here and there, lunch bags, but the call came out, and we're always up to the challenge when the call comes out. And so we just continued with it, and it's evolved to this pandemic, which is like we never even imagined to be in something like this, but before that happened, we were doing the community feed, and that was a beautiful thing. It was just a way to bring the community together for solidarity, and then to help, and then alongside just to help the folks out on that are unsheltered, and a lot of them are like people I know. So during this course of time, from helping my sister out to now, in between that time frame, we became homeless ourselves and used these shelters and used these resources ourselves, and and then when we got back on our feet, we always talked about amongst ourselves, Jasper and I and our family, just one day we hope that we can give back. And this is kind of like where it's just evolved. We just kind of went with the flow, and it just, to me, like, I'm a very spiritual person. So I feel like Creator guided us to TRN. And so we're, doing who we work with right now is the unsheltered folks. A lot of the unsheltered folks that are indigenous or native are people that we actually sat down and ate with at these soup kitchens, or on 2nd Street, where the distributors, our comrades distribute at. We've been at those lines. We've been at those lines with our son, who's now 6, and our grandson, who was an infant at the time. And the Native community there is solid. I mean, even though they may be, have their habits and stuff, when they see a baby in the midst of them, you 9 times out of 10, every time we went to that park, you look around and all of the natives were around us. All the men, and it didn't matter. Like, all the native men we felt safe. in a big crowd. So they still know us. They're still my brothers and sisters. I haven't done any one-on-one work out there because we were trying to keep as safe as we can so we can continue this work. And so we watched it for a little bit, and or we followed when they were distributing just for a little bit to the Indian Center. But same relatives. I knew about like 90% of the people out there, and but I so it's not really like I'm giving back in a sense, but it's still solidarity work like all the way across because I'm one of them and they're me too. So a human, I'm human and they're human, and that's why we continue this work. And it's a very very personal thing. Now it's just like it's even that much more like yeah, that's what we do right now. And then alongside that, we do go to the reservations. Like my parents are, like I had said earlier, in quarantine because they're elder and they have health issues. So my brother keeps them home, and so um, we get to see them, but we only get to see them by the porch. We drop stuff off alongside that. I have relatives out there that are making masks, and so I've been able to connect resources from Albuquerque to take to them so they can make masks for the community, things like that. And then there was another after school program that this lady was saying the kids were hungry, so we donated water out there a couple weeks ago, and just anything, anywhere. If I can feel something, we can do that, and that doesn't happen just because we're doing the running. It's because we have a good, solid, I guess, support system and comrades and TRN to allow us to, or not really allow us, but we're able to do that kind of work. Like we're able to like get there and feed those needs. And like I said, we're spiritual people. I think if you're indigenous, you should be. No, just kidding. Anyway, that's a topic, yeah. But any case, but my partner Jasper and I, we're really into harvesting medicinal plants. So we've been doing that for the nation right now. We connected with an artist and the Hopi Navajo riders, let's say about a week ago, where we offered sage to them and they took our offer, and we were able to deliver about 100 bundles out there. Not too long, just a couple days ago. We're not distributing that. They're putting them in food boxes in Gallup, like with the Gallup Food Bank. So that's all organized over there. We just contributed. So the behind the scenes stuff is like really important to us. Yeah, so that's kind of, I don't know. Yeah.
Great.
Cool. Let's turn to Brandon. I know you all at the info shop.
Aww.
I tried to say it.
So cute.
Oh.
Do do like daily feeds for relatives in Window Rock, and I know you've done a lot as far as helping with the mutual aid efforts going on right now. I was wondering if you could describe that and like just talk about the various groups that are involved.
Yeah, sure. So I'll start with how we got into mutual aid work. And so the term mutual aid is, of course, an anarchist and communist. Is typically viewed as an anarchist or communist term. But to me, mutual aid was simply kinship. And the kinship aspect was to ensure that everyone has a healthy and dignified life. And so those were teachings. Before the term mutual aid was introduced to me, I was with my aunties and grandmas and my grandpas in Black Mesa, Arizona. And we would drive around in he had this really old 1950s Chevy pickup that had no shocks at all. So we were bouncing everywhere in these really bad roads up on Black Mesa. But he was visiting people, and he was a farmer. And he was my great grandfather. His name was Besh Bawai, which translates to gold tooth. Besh Bawai Banali. And so he would pack up his truck with all the produce that he had gathered, and he would drive and meet with all these different families as far as that truck could go. And then he would pull out this really old like wooden handcart and load it up with the stuff that he had grown and would hand it off to elders. And that to me was just practicing, kinship. Even if by clan they weren't related to us, he was still, providing and reallocating the gifts that were bestowed upon him through the gift of farming to those around him, those who couldn't farm for themselves. That always stuck with me. My great grandfather was a very wise and beautiful man, and as well as my grandfather. But as I left the city, as I left the res and went to school in different areas and came back, became more committed to the idea of mutual aid. And so probably the hardest commitment was through the Red Nation. It started with probably around the same time the Red Nation was formed, was the murders of Allison and Gorman. The two Navajo men were brutally beaten, and not realizing, but being reminded of how cruel these border towns are to Native people and how cruel they've always been. And that cruelty continues through charity, because charity is basically about controlling the poor. It's not about supporting them or, removing them from these unhealthy conditions, but prolonging these unhealthy conditions. And so me and my partner, Red Milla Cody,
The famous, the one and only.
Radmilla Cody. Cue the Radmilla music.
She's a very compassionate and empathetic person. And so we had attended, well, first of all, the backstory is that we both moved back to the res and we both did not intend on organizing. Like, we had spent most of our lives organizing, and basically we're saying like, okay, we're just going to chill out for a bit, move back to the res and chill out. But that did not happen at all. So we attended this meeting in Gallup where Senator George Munoz was at. And he said, I want to talk solutions, but he didn't want to talk about the systemic racism that exists in Gallup and other border towns in McKinley County. He was just like, I don't want to talk about that. I just want to talk about solutions. And of course, the solutions were prolonging the misery of Native people through various nonprofits or whatever. And so during that meeting, Red Milla and I met with a group. At that time, we formed a quick group. There was like some of us who were feeding folks on the weekends here and there. But after that meeting, that's when the immediate action group started. They were already, I think they had started like a couple of weekends before. So we went to go help them. And when we went to go help them, we came to this agreement saying, we're not going to proselytize. We're not going to preach to folks, like we had seen other charity organizations do, because we're not a charity organization. We're going to try to figure out what's going on. But that didn't happen. So when me and Red Milla would leave, and because we were always traveling at that time, the unsheltered folks told on these different groups, it's like they would go back on their promise to us and would hand out Bibles, would do things, that made them feel uncomfortable. And that's not to say that I want to deny like prayer for someone who requests it, but that shouldn't be a condition of receiving help. Mm-hmm. And so that turned us off. And me and Rad Milla went off and did our own thing, because that's the reason why I think charities are so, and nonprofits are so attractive to folks, is because they have all these resources. They have chairs, they have tables, they have pop-up tents, they have PAs, they have space. They have a whole infrastructure of charity that's built there. And me and Red Milla just went and bought a pop-up tent, a couple of chairs and a table, and set up in Window Rock and started to feed unsheltered there every weekend. And that's when we first learned that there wasn't a treatment center on the Navajo Nation. So we started hearing different stories there. So we were doing that for about a year. And after a year, we discovered that there was a space open in the infamous or famous Window Rock Flea Market area, where all they call it Mutton Alley, the flea market zone, where all the where all the mutton stands are, all the fry bread stand, mutton stands. They call that Mutton Alley. And
Well, Alicia Coriz from Santa, or is it Santo Domingo? Santo Domingo Pueblo said that people will drive out there just to eat the mutton sandwiches.
yeah, yeah,
all the way across the res.
yeah.
3 hours.
Yeah, 3 hour drive, and it is like some of the shops. And shout outs to Scott's Food Stand. They'll probably be the best that serve the best
Steamed corn.
kinishbiji, neshjiji, steamed corn, and dumpling stew. And that's where the other famous character, we call him the Pinion or the Blanket Man. That guy who like drives a truck with like 1,000 blankets on his truck. It's like some old white dude. He's been there forever. And yeah. So anyway, so there was a space available there, and signed a lease. And I want to name it like this ultra masculine name, like the Central Fire Info Shop. And then and so Red Miller was like, what about like kinship? Like just call it Info Shop. And I was like, yeah, it's perfect. Like that makes sense. Because that's what we're about. And so we had our official opening on April 15th, 2017. And I would say that our info shop is the only type of its kind in a so-called reservation. We took a lot of inspiration from Tahoe One info shop in Flagstaff or Kinslena, Flagstaff, Arizona. That was probably the first indigenous founded info shop that was stridently anarchist and stridently socialist in the so-called United States. And we're the first one within like an actual reservation that I know of. And I'd love to be proven wrong. I'd love to know like a more radical history of info shops or super radical community organizing spaces that aren't tied to a nonprofit. So that's the other thing. We're a community funded space. We don't seek grants or write grants. We're not a 501c3. We're totally funded by the community. So every weekend we continued the solidarity meals from that point on, from that space. We've had a lot of amazing folks show up to the info shop. We provide. Then we started building a food bank, and we started having indigenous cooking workshops. And so all that tied into like kind of like preparing us for this moment now in history. It's like I said, we've been doing it every weekend. And so part of the mutual aid effort, solidarity, not charity. Just before this current crisis hit us as Indigenous people, we were in the midst of a campaign to get a treatment center built on the Navajo Nation. And now we see the awful consequences of not having that, because the NCI center, I know it's NCI, but I can't recall its full name right now. But it's the detox. It's the detox center, not Najoja something center. Yeah, I forgot what it is, but it's just NCI. Okay. And it was run by this really shady guy who had got his doctorate degrees from a degree mill that closed down in the 90s, Kevin Foley. And for whatever reason, they kept him in place no matter how many times people reported like his degrees are phony. Really mismanaged and ran down the place. And later, we just found out a couple of weeks ago that people who are part of that detox center, the detention center, 46 people tested positive, or over 40 people, unsheltered people, tested positive from that area alone. That's one part of it. And the second part was when we heard about how serious that this pandemic was going to become. I think there was like that false sense of security, like, well, when SARS came along and others came along, didn't really hit the Navajo Nation hard. So a lot of people were talking about that. But we were getting ready. And, to be honest, I was afraid to stay open. I was afraid to provide mutual aid just because it's a new virus, the novel coronavirus. And I didn't want, my first priority was not to endanger the lives of the collective members and not to endanger their families, but leave it to the collective members, to the youth, the younger folks, part of the collective, to find ways to protect ourselves and protect our families while still providing mutual aid. So we had a food bank that we've been building for the past year. and just put it all together. And by word of mouth and from people contacting us directly on social media, we began to put together care packages for folks. And at the same time, that's when we heard about the Navajo Hopi Families COVID-19 Relief Fund, that really long name. And it was started by Ethel Branch. And, she had this massive wave of people funding, their group. And there was also Talaho One in Flagstaff, who started the Kintlana Mutual Aid Group. And there was the Northern Diné Relief Group. And there's some other folks who were just doing it on their own, organically, started providing mutual aid. And so these other groups started to pop up around Window Rock and Tuba City and Chinle. These are the main cities on the Navajo Nation. Started to do their own thing. So we started to provide, reallocate the sources that we had to them. So all these groups started popping up. It was really beautiful to see. And we, like I said, some of the organic organizers that we met, his name is Kyle. He's been really awesome. He's in Fort Defiance, which is about 7 miles away from Window Rock. And his grandma works with a lot of elderly people. And his grandma was telling him, hey, all these elders are really scared to go shopping. And they're really afraid to even send their own kids to go shopping because they don't want them to come back and, possibly spread the virus among them. So we had all this food, and Kyle had the in on which elders and which differently abled people who were in need of food and sanitizer, stuff like that. But also what prompted me and the other collective members was that we would drive by the info shop because we're still deciding how to provide mutual aid from the info shop before they started doing these curfews. And we saw a lot of the unsheltered gathered outside the info shop. And it was heartbreaking because they knew that we were a source of support for them. And so they naturally gravitated towards that area where the info shop was located. Everywhere else was empty, but they started showing up at the door of the info shop. So we repositioned ourselves to provide portable foods, things that they can carry, getting masks, getting stuff for them to wash their hands. Now we have 4 hand washing stations set up in the area. So we had that all set up, and then the curfews hit, and then the owners, which is an oil and gas company that owned the area where Mud and Alley is, set up a restriction where they closed it down, so the unsheltered couldn't go there anymore. So now we spend our time driving around and finding them at the bridges and the ditches and different ravines and areas, making sure that they're fed, making sure that they have food. It's a lot of driving. It's a lot of going on dusty dirt roads and finding folks who are in need. And it's really emotionally taxing as well, especially when you go to these families who live in more rural areas and, you see all these kids playing and you see grandma. And I don't know. It's a visual. And I said this in the webinar, but it's a visual I think that's going to stick with us for a long time. That's what we started to do. That's how we started this mutual aid effort. And then now the info shop has teamed up with the relief fund folks through Janine Yazi. And we managed to partner with Navajo Housing Authority so that they could donate a house to us here in Fort Defiance and set that up as a distribution point. So that was really cool of them. So now we have, because if folks haven't been to the info shop, I would say it's cozy. Surprisingly, we've had punk shows there. We've had punk rock shows and poetry readings, and we've had Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz speak there, and Dr. Jennifer Netdale, and other awesome folks.
The last event you had was Melanie Yazzie.
And I was just about to say, I look at that flyer. I look at that flyer fondly.
It's Dr. Melanie Yazzie.
Dr. Melanie. Dr. Melanie.
It's a beautiful
Yazzie.
flyer.
Because I look at it, because I think that's the last time we all really hung out in person.
It was beautiful.
Us in Window Rock.
It was fierce.
Yeah, it was a beautiful event. And I remember all of us sitting at Denny's around a table, as we always do, being the loudest group at Denny's. And that was, it does seem like a world away now, looking at that flyer and, remembering the good times, so to speak, if they were even good. Yeah. But
Yeah, that was March 5th. That was almost 2 months ago, right as things were getting really bad in Seattle.
yeah, that's when things are starting to get really bad.
We were
So
driving home from Window Rock, and it was like a really beautiful weekend, and we turned on, I think it was like CNN News or something like that, and they were talking. They had some scientist on, and or epidemiologist, and they were asking him, how many people do you think are going to die from this? And he's like, I don't want to say, but he was like, millions of people, and that was back in March 5th. And it's just wild to see where we are now from that moment in time. And we thought we were um going, you know, we were off in the head for being so worried about it, because nobody else seemed to care. Like, nobody else seemed to care. And much like you all out there, we kind of brought together everybody in the Red Nation and had a really long, serious talk about it. And I think that, like, we were all prepared, like, a little bit more than some of the other groups. And like what you all are describing is like kind of just tapping into, because we're survivors first and foremost, and so like we already have those survival networks in that sense. But what you're describing though is like, you know Info Shop and Red Nation are organized. We believe in organization, and we really, and especially in these moments and times, like, I feel bad for people who aren't part of an organization, because they don't have the same kind of community and the kinship and the caring. Like, we, like, really, it's not just like we're comrades, who show up, but we actually like love each other and like to be around each other. So like hearing all this is like heartbreaking, especially like as it's unfolding in the Navajo Nation.
yeah, it's terrible on the Navajo Nation. Um, I shared this with Melly, like just seeing the pillars of our community, because we're matrilineal. Seeing aunties and grandmas afraid, that's alien to me. I'm used to seeing them strong and direct, and not that it's not happening now, but the uncertainty and the fear I'm not used to seeing, and seeing that a lot when we're delivering food or we're listening to them on when they call in, giving us directions, and just hearing that tinge of fear and uncertainty. That's brand new to me, and I do feel for them, because we are lucky to have great kinship between ourselves, but a lot of families don't. A lot of families are, they're dealing with the symptoms of colonialism and capitalism, and those structures are broken. And it's mainly those folks who have broken structures that we've been assisting a lot, especially the unsheltered. Because I think, we see Navajo Nation President Nez driving around with Sean Penn or Jason Momoa or whatever, delivering food to people who are driving up in dually pickups, but we don't see them handing out food to the unsheltered. We don't hear nothing about what's going on with them and how their needs are being addressed and how they're even being checked upon, because a lot of them had tested positive from being in the Gallup NCI area, and there's no way to track them. That's another problem that's being exacerbated by a lack of a treatment center on the Navajo Nation, or any type of like meaningful help, solidarity help with them, is because now we're seeing, like I said earlier, the consequences of not expressing good kinship with the poor, displaced, and dispossessed peoples on the net territory. So it's a real, it's yeah, I just can't explain even more. It's just how strange it is, just how strange it all is. But taking the small moments, because we have a neighbor, and I was getting our yard ready for gardening, and we're just thinking, like, doesn't the sky seem like bluer? It's strange. Like, the sky seems bluer. We can see the mountain tops of the sacred mountains from certain areas, but it's a sad benefit from the struggles, that the very real fears that people are dealing with. So, as you were saying earlier about how we're organized for this, we've always been talking about, like, people are going to look to the Info Shop, they're going to look to the Red Nation, they're going to look to Waln, they look to other indigenous organizations to guide them when capitalism fails, when capitalism falls. Like when capitalism falls, when the US collapses, they're going to turn towards people like us who appear to be organized, or they're going to fall inward to like a more violent form of organization, or to a more something that's comforting that doesn't actually provide any dignity for them. And so that's why I was telling the collective, like, this is like, we're preparing for the collapse now. Not to sound like doomsday-ish, but, you know, instilling the hope that this is a blow against capitalism. This is a blow against settler colonialism and racism and patriarchy. And, you know, reminding people that there's always opportunities in crisis, and there's opportunities for the monsters of the earth, the bad relatives, the inhuman, and there's opportunities for the humble people of the earth, and to reinforce and support the humble people of the earth who are going to take this opportunity in crisis, you know, to slay these monsters among us.
Hmm. You know, you brought something up that I think is really important, thinking about especially the relationship of the Navajo Nation to a place like Gallup, New Mexico. And I think it was yesterday, Cleo and I were talking on the phone about your relatives and what they're experiencing there in Gallup. And I was wondering if you could just describe, if you could share what they've experienced as far as the lockdown, being placed in these hotels, but then also being denied access to food, and like what does that look like, and you know, how did that situation arise?
It was strange when we heard the National Guard was coming in yesterday. I got the news like around 10 in the morning. And yeah, Jack McKinney is an asshole. He's always been an asshole.
Always been an asshole.
Yeah.
This is his last asshole move, like as mayor of Gallup, because he's no longer mayor. And that was his last act as mayor, was to be a complete asshole to Indigenous people.
Mm-hmm. They didn't even get notice. They didn't get, none of the relatives got notice. So when we found out, we check in with our relatives out there in Gallup and the surrounding area, Pinedale, Twin Lakes. So I go every morning, either on the phone or online, and check in with folks. And like one of our relatives was like waiting for her check, and it wasn't noon yet, and she gets her check at 11 o'clock, and this is the only check she gets for the month. And we told her, like, it's gonna be shut down by noon. You should just, you know, get what you can, just turn around. But this is like her monthly shopping date, you know, like, so even against our advice, she went ahead and got in line at Walmart. Like, it was just like so disheartening, and it's just like, she has her mask and she has her gloves on, but there's still that high concern for her. We just, you know, we just hold our breath, and, you know, and then we called the next person, and another relative was coming from Twin Lakes, hitchhiked in, and was going to continue into Gallup, but it didn't happen. He got as far as TNR and got some meat, some bread, and some stuff, and we assured him, like, just get what you can that you could get you through the weekend, and we'll get to you. You know, we'll get to you by Monday and bring you food when this lockdown is lifted. Because we're not sure what the forces are going to do to you, because they did, like, it seemed like they were just scurrying around for food for the last minute. We don't even know if it was essential foods that they got. I don't know what was available to them. And then there's also, like, we also know of relatives that are that have tested positive for the COVID virus, and they weren't even prepared for any of this. They came positive and were told to go back to their structures or wherever they may be, and then someone will call you tomorrow, and tomorrow comes, and they're just kind of like, all right, time for you to go to the hotel room, and this is where we're going to quarantine you for 10 days. And just not, like, you know, she gets a nurse call. It was she, and now it's become they. There's like a group of 4 relatives that we know within a 2-day span. So, so we check in with them and try to reassure them that we'll bring Pedialyte and honey and sage and lemons and stuff like that. And that's the solidarity that we want to bring during this pandemic. And I don't know, I don't really know the terminologies to what we're trying to achieve, but I know, like, I understand what Brandon's talking about when he's talking about that I understand. That I understand, and that's what we're doing when it boils back down to it, like to the basics. That's, I guess that's what we're working off of, that reminder of what what was always set and instilled in us as we were growing up, like this: you always help your relatives, and no matter what, and have courage. And that's what we go by. I know we know as mutual aid workers that there's a high risk, but we're not gonna, like Brandon said, we want to give them dignity. Like, we have our propane, we have our potatoes for the week, the month, like they don't have to feel like they're forgotten, overlooked, or they have to do without. So back to our relatives that are back in the hotel room, they're given cold meals. And I thought one of the things that I've read about COVID is that if you keep hot liquids going, it helps to kill the virus or drain the virus. I mean, when you're sick, everybody knows hot liquids are best, but they're given a cold burrito, some soda and chips. Like, that doesn't make sense. 3 times a day. So because of those reasons, we've had like the relatives there go to these places and drop off like Gatorade, a few things, but at the same time, doing mutual aid work isn't, you've got to kind of train yourself, like, mentally, and with this PPE protocols. It's very important to even deliver something is just mind-boggling. You have to process it at the end of the day. But however, those are the things that we've seen, like as far as traveling amongst our communities. We see that people are scared, distancing, and the PPE. I don't see everybody following it. We did go amongst our relatives and warn them that this is coming. That was about a month and a half ago, and they didn't listen. Like, I feel like we weren't heard. We went up into the northeast corner of the reservation, and at that time we were walking with our mask and our gloves, and everybody was just looking at us like we were crazy. And but it was at that time, there was only a few cases that were mentioned out in the Arizona northeastern area. But I just and the unsheltered folks are just kind of overlooked too. If you look at them in the eyes, it's just like they're, I don't know, they still like to me, it's like they've been through so much already. I don't know, like, I can't say they're fearless, but even then they don't have any resources at times. Like, I wish we had a bag in of food in our car all the time. It's what we say, like, if we can find something in the car, we'll hand it out and stuff like that. But I'm just all over the place with this. There's so many different factors to cover. But that's what I've seen. Like, just delivering supplies and connecting those resources is really, they're very grateful for it. I see that, like, on that level. But I know the need is still, like, not met. So I'm just, like, very, I don't want to call it honored, but I'm just very grateful that I'm able to be a part of this solution, for us that are going to be able to continue with this work. And
So in some ways, it's like you're just doing what we've always been doing, but more.
Yeah, but more. but with masks and gloves and no hugs back from the grandmas. Yeah, at the beginning, like when people weren't so scared, the grandmas were still hugging you for the little things you would give them. Like this grandma, she was just trotting along. We went, and then she was at TNR. She was taking her little break. We told her, "Do you need a ride somewhere?" She goes, "No, I'm just out for my walk." And we saw her from Gramerco, and then she was already at TNR. I don't know how many miles that is, but that seemed like quite a ways, huh?
Yeah.
So she was sitting there, and she was opening up her noon lunch, I guess, and you could see his tortillas. We gave her a hygiene pack that we had in TRN office, and we were distributing those, and she was just really happy. Like she was just really fit, and she was just really thankful. She goes, "Oh, I told Cinda I needed the soap, Yeah, I needed a comb, when she started looking through the little bag and everything, and it had like a clean washcloth and everything, and she didn't seem unsheltered. She just seemed like, I'm gonna go into town, I'm gonna walk, and she was very fit, and it didn't feel like charity work. It was just like more like, hey auntie, kind of thing, and she was just grateful, and she understood. And so then we went along on our journey and went up north, further north on the reservation, and over there too, like the gratitude that you see amongst the unsheltered folks. They really stoked about seeing movement like this, even though like they're unsheltered. You see that they can connect and they understand. You can see that, and they pump their fist, and they totally get it.
Yep.
They totally get it. They totally get it. And
They always have. They've always.
Whenever we have marches and whenever we cross San Mateo
Yeah.
into the International District,
Yeah.
all the homies come out and start cheering us. They're
Really
like,
join?
Red Nation!
Yeah, I think it's important. Brandon and Cleo, you both brought this up. We wanted to talk about like the impact of COVID-19 on our unsheltered or houseless relatives, because that's like a population that is being really ignored. I think in the statistics or the other things, the ways that people are talking about the impact of this on Native relatives. But like Info Shop and Red Nation, we're kind of like have grown up together. I think here in this region in this struggle, and like, sorry, Jasper's cats. Are there cats over there? Oh, I was like, cats? Nay, clouds. The work we do, like, Brandon brought up that solidarity, not charity framework. That the solidarity we do, like, there's a politics. There's a politics about dismantling capitalism and pushing back against colonialism behind the work that we do. So, and the kinship that we extend, the solidarity we extend, this work has always been about supporting our unsheltered relatives, because we know that they face extreme conditions in their lives because of colonialism and capitalism, especially in border towns like Albuquerque and Gallup. And so we have always very consciously, both of the organizations, have very consciously always supported our unsheltered relatives because we have this political commitment. And thank goodness there are, I mean, not to toot our own horns, but we're not the only organizations that exist. But thank goodness there are groups of people and organizations that exist who actually understand like how capitalism works and what it really looks like and the devastation that it causes on a daily basis for our relatives, and that our unsheltered relatives are like the manifestation of that, and deserve all of our love and support as relatives in a society where there's so much violence enacted against Native people. But we know that COVID-19 is happening because of capitalism, right? And that the numbers are so high for Diné people because of like the complete collapse of any kind of support for our people because of colonialism and the persistent kind of logic of disappearance and death that surrounds us constantly. And this is really stark in border town spaces where we experience hyper violence from white people, from Mayor McKinney, from the police, pretty much from every single angle. And so we knew that this was what the system looked like years ago, like a long time ago, before this pandemic hit. And I think the pandemic is just really stripping back all of the bullshit liberal layers about, individual self-help and all of these other like public welfare programs, and is just really laying bare what the system actually is. And so I think it's important that we develop these types of organizations that have these politics that are stridently committed to kinship and our relatives in this way, because when these moments happen where all of the other stuff that might help to kind of cover up what's really going on gets peeled back, that we're able to be here to like keep our people alive in these moments. You know, I was talking to my comrade Demetrius, he's another Dene, Red Nation member, just before we recorded this podcast, and I was really thinking, I haven't really been wanting to say this, but it's been on my mind the last few days because of like the numbers in Navajo Nation. But I'm like, we're like in a dark chapter of history as a people, particularly as Dene people. Like we're like Huelde adjacent right now. Huelde is like when we were forced marched to Fort Sumner and in a concentration camp for 4 years between 1864 and 1868. And like what we're facing because of the pandemic is it's dark. And just admitting that and thinking about what that means in terms of the God, our people have been around for millennia, like a long time. And to think about this chapter in history and what's happening. And, you know, Brandon, what you were saying breaks my heart to see the women who are like the backbone of our society afraid. It's it just really brings it home, I think, in a really real way. I don't have a whole lot of uplifting things to say right now about it, but other than I'm just really grateful for my Red Nation comrades, my info shop comrades for seeing the truth a long time ago and being prepared enough to do this kind of work. Because we're going to be in this for the long haul, I think, with this dark chapter. Oh God, what's going to snowball after this when the pandemic ends? I think the economy of the Navajo Nation is going to collapse. I mean, there's a lot of shit that's going to happen, and so I'm just glad that some of us are prepared and not afraid of the truth. And then what are we going to do to ensure the future of our people?
And it's also worth pointing out, you know, somebody who's not Navajo for a second, to think about like, well, I think about like how this is being framed nationally as a Democrat versus Republican. You know, the Trumpers are, you know, organizing white supremacist marches on state capitals to open the state, you know, the economy's up. You have, you know, a right-wing mayor in Grants who's like calling for the opening up of the economy and blah 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 blah. And that Grants is a border town next to Gallup, but McKinney is a registered Democrat, right? And thinking about the state politics in New Mexico, it's kind of Democrat top to bottom, and especially in a lot of these counties where there's high rates of infection.
Yeah, McKinley County is like a Democratic stronghold in the state of New Mexico.
But then you think about like a state like South Dakota, where I'm from, they're an entirely red state, like overtly to the right of Trump, you know. It's like
just like in your face white supremacy.
And they, you know, they had the big meat packing plant incident where over 400 of their workers in a plant of about 1,000 people were infected with COVID-19, and they still haven't had a stay-at-home order. The reservations have completely locked down and have largely, you know, proactively like prevented the spread on the reservation. But nonetheless, it just shows that like that the most vulnerable people, like these structures are in place, and it doesn't matter who's in charge, because, you know, like that was something that always blew my mind coming down here, is that like, yeah, it's a Democratic controlled state. Yeah, the Democratic Party is really powerful, but there's the same levels of violence against Indigenous people, and in some ways it's more extreme and more in your face, because there are more Native people just in this particular region, and there is more visibility, you know. And so I was just thinking about that in terms of like the border town economy, and like even thinking at a national like scale, that people want to like praise the Democrats for their proactive response, but if you look at a state like New Mexico and 50% of the cases are Native people, and we only make up 10% of the population, then that's a failure. That's a tragic failure, and it should not be, you know, New Mexico should not be congratulated for allowing Native people to die. So I think like one thing that we should talk about a little bit more, and I want to hear Brandon's thoughts on this, is about the portrayal of the Navajo Nation as, this kind of poverty-stricken, rural, geographically isolated reservation, and its portrayal and obsession, in the national media. And I don't know if you want to like maybe break down some of the popular or some of the statistics of the Navajo Nation, Melanie, and then we can talk about like what this kind of gaze, this media gaze and obsession with the Navajo Nation has been, and like how it actually obscures like the colonial relation and
Yep.
and the processes of imperialism.
Yeah, so for folks who may not know, the Navajo Nation is large, not large enough as far as I'm concerned.
Oh wow,
Yeah,
wow.
it's true.
Oh, oh, oh.
So it's about 27,000 square miles. It's larger than some of the states, the so-called states in the United States. It has the largest contiguous land base of any indigenous nation in the so-called U.S. But in that ginormous geographical area, there are only 10 hospitals and or clinics. So the 10 includes hospitals and clinics total. Of course, clinics can't handle emergency situations. Only hospitals can. There are only 13 grocery stores. And this is to service a population of about 170 to 190,000 people. The 2010 census Navajo population was around 300,000. So this means somewhere between 3/5 to 2/3 of all Diné people live in the Navajo Nation, within the boundaries of the Navajo Nation. Actually, about 10% of us, according to the census, live here in Albuquerque. Just to give you a breakdown of where our people are at. But, to service that population in that large space, I mean, that's the access to food and the access to healthcare, basically just like quality of life. You can see infrastructurally why the infection rates might be so high, as well as the mortality rate because of COVID-19 in our communities. But yeah, I've been seeing the info shop on Instagram. You should check out info shop on Instagram. They have actually really beautiful graphics, but also like really hard hitting critiques and analysis that they post on Instagram on a regular basis. But I've been seeing you all post some really good critiques of the way that the Navajo Nation is being portrayed in the mainstream media. Of course, over the last couple of weeks, Navajo Nation has really like taken off as a topic, like a very popular topic related to COVID-19 in national and international media. But some of the ways that like it's being portrayed is really troubling and probably pretty consistent with like the racist portrayals, like we call it poverty porn, kind of portrayals of like where Nick's people are from, Pine Ridge, for example, historically. So, Brandon, maybe you can just tell us a little bit about where those critiques are coming from.
But I'm not from Pine Ridge, by the way.
Nick isn't
Oh,
from
you're
Pine Ridge.
not. That's news to me. No, I'm kidding. I thought all the Couples were from Pine Ridge. Kidding. No. Thanks, Melanie. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because we have always seen the Navajo Nation as a destination for fantasy, I think. We think of Monument Valley. We're always wearing loincloths. We're super tanned. And
Nay.
even the Lakotas there speak Navajo. If you look at the old movies, the Plains folks. But anyway, and so there's this, and I think there's that plays into the white savior fantasy, where the white savior is another force of colonization or manifest destiny, because always a white person, guns drawn, but instead of the guns, now it's the banks. And so we see this influx of celebrity come in onto the Navajo Nation. And, it's really, and I'm not going to name which ones, and maybe I will, but
go for it. Nay.
It was insulting when a certain celebrity came in and was asking, my partner Redmilla and some other folks on the Navajo Nation to to reject our critiques of U.S. imperialism, but to also say like, oh yeah, like I covered, I identify as a gay person, non-gender binary conforming. But we need stories, we need footage of this, we need footage of that. And what they were asking about was like people hungry, people starving, people panic. And it was just super insulting that that's the angle that they kept pushing, and they're still pushing to this day. So when we talk about the poverty porn, it's to build up, capital somewhere, and that capital is always unevenly distributed and it's always unevenly handled. There's still a structure of power in place when we do poverty porn and charity, an uneven, an imbalance of power of the settler over indigenous people through these organizations, through branding, through clips of grandma sitting in a truck, and just like how there's the trope of native movies where like there's always an alcoholic family, and then at the end of the day ceremony saves them. There's our tropes in movies and in real life where they want to show the disparity and misery rather than focusing on how we get there, because then that promotes the false narrative of poverty is a choice. And it's not a choice for Navajo people. It's not a choice for indigenous people anywhere that are affected by U.S. imperialism and capitalism. It's never a choice for us. And so it reinforces the idea that we've chosen to live on polluted lands from uranium mining from the 1940s, from having our aquifers turned to salt domes from coal mining, from having having respiratory problems before COVID-19 from atmospheric conditions, from having at one time 4 coal-fired power plants in the Southwest in our territory. Now there's 3 of them in operation, or having nuclear explosions in 1967 to release natural gas in the Four Corners area. All this stuff, all of these horrible monsters that started way before COVID-19, were signed and enacted by Democrats and Republicans, by the U.S. political system of so-called democracy, the violent imposition of democracy upon the net people. And so, and we all heard I forgot which U.S. senator said it. It was during the Reagan administration, saying like, if you want to look at the failure of socialism, look at Indian reservations. And it's as though we had a choice, as though we had a choice to have clean water, to have access to unpolluted lands, when we never had that choice to begin with, prior towards invasion from settler forces. And you brought up a point earlier, Melanie, about this is another sad chapter in Diné history, Indigenous people's history, because in some way they're always connected anyway through all history. But prior to that, we were able to thrive again because our water was still clean. We still had unfettered access to the land, to livestock, and our kinship system wasn't as deteriorated as it is now. But through capitalism, colonialism, and U.S. policies, a lot of that has deteriorated greatly, from the land to families and to our kinship systems, and even the water. So that's the problem with poverty porn, is that it's as though we've chosen to live this way, that we don't fall into the pull yourself up by the bootstraps fallacy. There's major structures in place today that prevent us from building a future for ourselves, not only as the net people, but for all indigenous people affected by U.S. imperialism and capitalism. And no one wants to talk about that. To them, it's a vague, mysterious problem. Well, it's not vague and mysterious to indigenous people who are dying every day from it, because we live that reality every day. And the people who wrote these policies have names. They're either dead or they're in office. So it's not a vague problem. If we can do contact tracing on people who have tested positive for COVID-19, we can do contact tracing on U.S. imperialist policies on indigenous people. And people are unwilling to do that, from celebrities all the way down.
That's a really amazing way to put it.
It really is.
Contact tracing on U.S. imperialism and settler colonialism.
Hell yeah.
We can do
Brandon.
that. And with celebrities, and we screened, and I don't mean to name drop, but MIA's people reached out to the info shop, and we're one of the first groups. MIA, the recording artists from England, from Britain, I love all those British people memes, by the way. Anyway,
We're just in trashing British people.
On our private
on our
messenger
private,
channel,
our private messenger chat. So anyway, so her people reached out to us and they said that they have a brand new documentary about her life, and wanted to know if we wanted to screen it. So we knew that MIA was somewhat radical, and so yeah, and a lot of our collective members were huge fans of hers, so we screened it. And I think ultimately the lesson of her documentary was that celebrity does nothing, because she was fighting for her folks in India who were facing in Malaysia and India who were facing genocide and fighting back, like in the Tamil people who are still trying to fight for their homelands and still regain their autonomy within that area. And so she was a celebrity, and at every concert she would talk about it, and people were like, yeah, whatever. And people would like shout because they really know what she was talking about in the first place. And then she realized as sort of entered that documentary, like that did nothing. Like being a celebrity did nothing to talk about it. It wasn't until she started to attend meetings in Britain regarding Tamil genocide and Tamil solidarity that she started to make a difference, because she was actually there doing the daily work, the day in, day out struggle of organizing rather than just speaking about it. She was there to do day in, day out organizing of studying policies, of studying capitalism, of studying, colonialism and everything else. So she took that extra step of simply bringing awareness to actually enveloping herself within the daily struggle of what it means to really organize against these monsters among us. And so that's the problem with celebrity. Like it solves nothing. I mean, we'll get a boost and maybe we'll get $1 million. And then we'll see that co-option at $1 million by the Navajo Nation government, which is what we're seeing now. And I also want to talk about the denial of mutual aid during these curfews, if we have time for that. But that's it. But yeah, that's the struggle. That's a fallacy of awareness or recognition, right? Like we see white folks doing land recognition all the time, but they're not signing over their house deeds or land deeds over to Native people. It's just like, oh yeah, here's the $2 million I paid for like 120 acres of land on Tewa territory. Like, okay, that's nice. It's nice to know that you bought stolen land and continue that process of capital. That's what celebrity awareness and recognition are to me. It's just a continuation of control over the history and story of indigenous people who deal with the consequences of U.S. imperialism every day.
Well, I think this is like a really good place to really transition into thinking about how people can support the work both of you are doing. I know that you mentioned, Brandon, that there's resource raising and fundraising for InfoShop, and if you could give that to us right now, where people can find your work as the InfoShop, but also how people can help support the work that you're doing there.
Thanks. Yeah. So we have, when we first started, and we were first doing mutual aid before even Navajo Nation started to do anything about it. We have a great network of rad as hell relatives / comrades who jumped in and financially began to support us. Because like I said, we had a food bank, and that food bank, it took a year to build and it was gone within 2 weeks. So we started to panic because we're getting more messages. Like the messages we're getting more intense, and we're getting less. And I hate to make it so dramatic or even to compare it to the struggle of what happened during the Holocaust, but it was like, that movie, Schindler's List, where he's talking about, I could have saved more people. And I was digging around the InfoShop thinking, finding bits of food here and there and thinking I could have helped, like we could have helped more people. Like I found more food. We could have packed in more food. I found more. We had moments like that where we were just like, we were limited. But just as things got dark and I went to go check the mail, we got a whole bunch of boxes of food and items. Then we started doing the fundraising, and things really took off from there. Thanks to boosting from the Red Nation and Waln and other radical groups online. we started getting a lot of money in so to go online to find us, you just look up KE Info Shop on social media, on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, or you can go to our website, keinfoshop.org/donate. And also we have a link tree, and because I'm an old man, so just discovering what Linktree is. Some younger person than me. Some younger person than me is like, you should put a Linktree up that lists all these different organizations. I did like quick research on Linktree. Like,
You're like, how do I grow it?
Yeah. I had to put on my bifocals and like, oh, there's Linktree. How do I find it? Yeah, looking through the pages. So we have a Linktree. If you go to our Instagram page, and I think on our main website, there's a link tree that lists other Indigenous-led mutual aid efforts across this hemisphere, the North American continent. So there's more efforts there because Info Shop, we partnered with the Relief Fund group. So every week we order about from $10,000 to $30,000 worth of food that are distributed from Fort Defiance, the NHA house that we got, and then they go to the far eastern portions of Navajo Nation. So there's other groups there. So to find other groups here, besides Info Shop and the other non-Navajo groups, the other Indigenous groups, you'll find a link to their efforts on our link tree, which is on our main homepage, keinfoshop.org, and the link in our bio on Instagram. So you'll find out more info there.
Cool. Thanks so much. And Cleo, what's the best way people can support? I know we have a support page on the Red Nations, the rednation.org/support. We'll post this in the show notes, but for those who are listening in Navajo Nation or Albuquerque area, what's the best way that they can help you continue to do these mutual aid efforts?
I think the best way is just to donate to the Red Nation. I think that's the best way because we can, we're fortunate enough to be able to get supplies within Albuquerque. Also just make that extra effort to reach out or bring to our attention what areas might need help, and also just be a good relative and I guess network with us. That's basically, I think, the best way to support us. And if you need to do donations, we haven't made any drop-offs yet, but those could be considered, I think. I'm not sure about that yet. We haven't really made a call out for those kind of things, but I know that we need masks. We definitely need a call out for masks to distribute amongst the unsheltered folks, unsheltered relatives. We also need I know they don't have sanitizers out there. Those are some of the things that have been asked for, and I think that because right now we're doing a lot of food, so food donations and forms of, if you want to do food donations, I think beans is good. Dry goods, dry cans. But right now, those are the main things. Like keep us going. Just support us. Monetary funds are greatly appreciated to keep these resources stocked up, like the beans, the fruit. We want to be mindful of what we give them. We try to put something healthy and alive into the meals. So those kind of things. Some farmers are aware of what we're doing, and they want to donate some greens as soon as it's harvestable, when it's time to harvest. So those kind of things, and plant your seeds and donate your greens, that's like really important, because as not only do we feed, but I want to be really mindful of what we're feeding our people. Canned goods are good, but fresh is better, So, right now what we were hearing from our unsheltered relatives is like there's not a lot of hot meals being offered. A lot of the meals are like bagged foods, cold sandwiches, a lot of processed foods. So we're trying not to do those kind of things. We're trying to like a healthy bean burrito with some cheese, and like a fruit, definitely water. And we're adding hygiene packs this week. We've had hygiene packs before, but we ran out and we've gotten some in. So those kind of things. But right now, the main thing I think is if anybody wants to donate some masks, contact us through TRN, the webpage.
Cool. And just a side note too, the Red Nation has undertaken an initial kind of small scale agricultural project. So we are trying to grow our own food because Cleo has, Cleo and Jasper have gone out and harvested a lot of the traditional kind of foods. And so we don't like just feed, burritos, like, frozen burritos to people. Like all the stuff we make for our community and our relatives is handmade and made with love. And it's traditional like food because we believe that our relatives should have access to their traditional foods and their traditional medicines. And so that's another part too that I guess you talked about a little bit, but I just want to emphasize too that you have been, providing us with medicines because we can't go out and harvest, And so like our sages, our even sage tea, our cedar tea, all those kinds of things have been incredibly important. It's something that, especially indigenous people face, that they need these medicines to continue to do the things they do, to pray, to hold ceremony. And so that's important to just recognize as well, that mutual aid extends beyond, just what you put in your belly, but also how you nourish your soul as well. And that's always been a key component to, the Red Nation's mutual aid philosophy, as well as the info shops philosophy. And this is such a beautiful conversation, you all. And we will be posting up your links and how people can support and get involved. And I just want to say, wopila to all of you and Blehetjapio, that you all take courage in doing this work, and that you are the warriors. Like we should instead of the great white Ruffalo, we should be talking about our mutual aid workers out there in the communities right now. So thank you again.
Aw.
That was sweet. Thanks, Nick. Yeah, celebrities, just give us your money.
Yeah, I didn't want to say that blatantly, but yes, thank you for saying it.
Don't go around recording things. We don't need you. We don't need you as like an intermediary trying to control the narrative. Like just give us your money. We know what we're doing. Just stop.
Yeah, it's not like we're like it's not like we hate like Mark Ruffalo or something like that. It's just that like it gets in the way, It's like it's okay, you really want to help, and this is the way that we're asking you to help. So please, this is a process that we've created, and respect the boundaries,
Yeah. Give us your money.
Personally, I should prefer to see the Aborigines.
And the Indians, too. And the Indians, too.
This should be most enlightening.
What makes the red man red? Teach 'em all about Red Man.
What made the red man red? What made the red man red? What made the red man red? What made the red man red?
Teach 'em all about Red Man. Red Man.
Savages.
Redskins, redskins, red souls, redskins. For many moons, red man fight pale face. Sometime you win, sometime we win. Redskins.
Savages. Like savages.
Pale face,
Savages.
pale face.
Savages.
Go out and capture a few Indians.
Savages.